Gay's boy who lived on the street saved a rich man who was about to fall from a building. After rewarding him, the millionaire decided to follow the boy and fell to his knees, sobbing at what he did. The white hallway of the public hospital seemed longer that Thursday afternoon. The fluorescent lamps flickered intermittently, casting shadows on the stained walls and tense faces of the patients waiting for care. Merrick, a thin boy with deep brown eyes and unkempt dark hair, gripped his brother Calder's small hand with a firmness that belied his attempt to appear calm. Each step he took toward the doctor's office seemed like a monumental effort, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. The peeling walls, with pieces of grey paint falling to the floor, seemed to reflect Merrick's state of mind, worn out but still standing. The strong smell of disinfectant permeated the air, mixed with a faint metallic scent that made his stomach churn. Still, he maintained a forced, almost painful smile, trying to hide the whirlwind of emotions that dominated him. His younger brother couldn't see the fear in his eyes. "It'll all be okay, little bro. Mom always said that after the storm comes the calm, and she never lied to us, did she?" Merrick asked, tilting his head to look at Calder, who nodded with a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The last few weeks had been a nightmare since Calder started showing the first symptoms. The memory of his brother running through the backyard with a contagious laugh seemed to belong to a distant, almost unreal life. Now the 6-year-old could hardly walk a few meters without needing to stop. Merrick remembered the first time he noticed his brother's lips turning purple. He had woken up in the middle of the night to get water from the kitchen and found Calder sitting on the floor, breathing with difficulty. Since then, each day brought a new reason for concern. "Calder, do you want me to carry you on my back? Remember how we used to play horsey when you were smaller?" He would ask, trying not to worry his younger brother, his voice laden with an artificial lightness trying to hide the desperation that grew in his chest like a storm. The sound of Merrick's worn-out sneakers against the vinyl floor echoed through the hallway, as if his worries were being amplified for all to hear. On their way to the doctor's office, they had to stop 3 times for Calder to catch his breath. Each pause seemed like a cruel reminder of the severity of the situation. On the 3rd stop, Merrick crouched down to his brother's level and gently held his face. "Just hold on a little longer, okay? We're almost there. The doctor will help you, I promise." He swallowed hard, feeling a lump forming in his throat. Promises were easy to make, but at that moment, they sounded like empty words. When they finally reached the doctor's office, Dr. Seraphine was waiting for them. Her grave expression contrasted with the vibrant color of her red-framed glasses. The office was small, with shelves filled with medical books and a desk marked by years of use. A single small window allowed the golden light of late afternoon to enter, but even that seemed insufficient to illuminate the heavy atmosphere. Merrick helped his brother sit in the chair facing the doctor, watching as his legs dangled in the air, unable to reach the floor. It was a sight that should have been adorable, but at that moment, it only filled him with sadness. "Doctor, please tell me you found out what my brother has. I can't bear to see him suffering like this anymore." His voice broke at the end of the sentence, but he quickly cleared his throat and straightened his shoulders. Dr. Seraphine adjusted the papers on her desk before starting to speak. Each of her movements seemed calculated, as if she were choosing her words with extreme care. "Merrick, your brother has a rare heart condition called restrictive cardiomyopathy." Her tone was professional, but there was a palpable sadness in her voice. "It's a disease that affects the heart muscle, preventing it from pumping blood properly to the body." Merrick felt a chill run down his spine, as if the temperature in the office had suddenly dropped. He heard the words, but their meaning seemed to escape his understanding. "But there's a cure, right? There must be some treatment. Please, doctor, tell me there's something we can do." He looked at his brother, who was now playing absent-mindedly with the zipper of his jacket. Calder seemed oblivious to the gravity of the moment, and Merrick almost envied his innocence. The doctor took a deep breath, removing her glasses and rubbing her eyes. It was clear she'd had this conversation countless times before, but that didn't make the task any less painful. "There is a treatment. It's an expensive procedure, but one that can offer a real chance for your brother," she said. And Merrick felt a spark of hope ignite within him, but it only lasted a moment. "The estimated cost is around $1.5 million. The figure hung in the air like a death sentence. He gripped the papers in his hands, the weight of reality crashing down on him with crushing force. "What? You can't do anything? It's just the 2 of us, doctor." Our mother passed away 2 years ago. We have no father, no one. I'm the only one who can do something for him, but this amount, it's too high," said the boy, with tears in his eyes. The silence that followed was deafening. Dr. Seraphine averted her gaze, and Merrick realized she had no answers that could ease his pain. Calder, exhausted, had fallen asleep in the chair, his small chest rising and falling with difficulty. Merrick looked at his brother and felt a wave of despair. How could he get that money? He delivered newspapers after school, earning just enough to buy basic food. "I can work more. I can get another job. How much time do we have, doctor?" He knew his suggestion was absurd, but at that moment it was all he could think of. Before the doctor could answer, Calder woke up with a coughing fit that quickly escalated into something more serious. His eyes widened in panic and Merrick ran to hold his brother. "Breathe with me, Calder. Just like we practiced, remember? 1, 2, 3. Please, little brother, breathe." Sweat poured down Calder's forehead, his lips turning an even deeper shade of purple. The doctor acted quickly, grabbing her stethoscope and listening to the boy's heart. Merrick held his brother's hand so tightly that his own fingers hurt. "It'll pass, Calder. Your big brother is here. I won't let anything bad happen to you," he said, trying to comfort his brother. After the crisis passed, Merrick carried his brother to the hospital chapel. Each step was heavy, as if he were carrying more than just Calder's frail body. He sat on the last pew, hugging his sleeping brother. The candles flickered softly, and he began to pray, murmuring the prayers his mother had taught him. "God, my mother taught me that you always have a solution for a difficult problem. Please help me. I don't know what to do. He's all I have left. My family is gone, and I only have him. Please give me a way to help him." His tears flowed silently, falling onto Calder's face. His brother gasped loudly and cried out in pain. Merrick froze, recognizing the danger in Calder's scream. "Help! Someone please help my brother!" He ran, carrying his brother in his arms, his heart pounding wildly. The doctors rushed the boy away on a stretcher. The double doors of the emergency room closed in front of him, blocking his view. "Calder! Calder! Don't leave me alone, please, God, don't leave me alone." The last sound Merrick heard before the doors closed was the shrill beep of the heart monitor, announcing that his brother's heart had stopped. The noise seemed to reverberate inside his head, echoing like a final sentence. His legs gave out and he fell to his knees in the cold hospital corridor, the impact echoing softly through the silent space. His trembling hands were still outstretched in the direction where Calder had disappeared, as if he could pull his brother back by sheer force of will. For a moment, Merrick froze, the shock robbing him of the ability to think or react. Then reality hit him with the force of a physical blow. A sob escaped his throat, rough and uncontrolled, followed by another and another, until he could no longer contain the tears streaming down his face. He clutched his hands against the cold floor, as if searching for some kind of anchor, something to keep him from being completely swallowed by despair. No, it can't be. This can't be happening. His voice was a broken whisper, lost amidst the distant noises of the hospital. Calder's face flooded his mind, the shy smile, the bright eyes that always sought his for reassurance. Merrick felt a lump tighten in his throat as fear and guilt mingled in a storm of emotions. "I promised," he repeated, almost like a mantra, his voice choked by sobs. "I promised to take care of you. I promised nothing bad would happen." The words were like knives cutting deeply as he spoke them. Merrick pounded his fist against the floor, a futile attempt to ease the pain that seemed to overflow within him. His body shook, his sobs echoing through the empty corridor, but he didn't care if anyone saw him. Despair consumed every fiber of his being, leaving him vulnerable, exposed, unable to find any shred of strength. He curled up on the floor, hugging his knees as the tears continued to fall, heavy and unending, carrying with them all the weight of his sorrow. The silence was broken by the sound of the double doors opening. Dr. Seraphine emerged, her white coat stained with sweat, her disheveled hair falling across her tired face. Each step she took seemed heavy, as if she carried the weight of all the lives under her responsibility. Merrick, still huddled on the cold corridor floor, lifted his face. Tears still streamed down his cheeks, and his eyes were swollen, but still they fixed on hers. It was a look that pleaded for an answer, for hope, for anything that could erase the fear that gripped his chest. The doctor paused before him, took a deep breath and spoke firmly but without hiding her weariness. "Your brother suffered a cardiac arrest. We managed to bring him back, Merrick. It was close, but he's a fighter. He's breathing on his own now." Her tone was professional, but there was a slight softness, an acknowledgement of the relief those words would bring. Merrick blinked, trying to process what he had heard. For a moment, it seemed that the world around him had fallen silent. He tried to stand up, but his legs were shaking as if made of rubber. The adrenaline and panic that had kept him on his feet until that moment began to dissipate, leaving only weariness in its place. Dr. Seraphine noticed his difficulty and placed a firm hand on his thin shoulders, helping him balance. The contact was comforting in a way he did not expect. Thank you, doctor," he mumbled, his voice hoarse and broken. She nodded, but her expression was not one of total victory. There was something else she wasn't saying, but Merrick didn't want to think about it yet. He needed to see Calder, needed to confirm with his own eyes that his brother was alive. "Can I see him, doctor? Please, I need to see him. I need to tell him I'm here, that he's not alone." His words came out fast, almost pleading, as he tried to hold back the tears that threatened to return. Dr. Seraphine agreed with a small nod, gesturing for him to follow her. The path to the observation room was short, but for Merrick it seemed like an eternity. His steps echoed through the now silent corridors, and every sound seemed to amplify his anxiety. When they finally arrived, the doctor carefully opened the door, allowing him to see inside the room. The space was small and cold, dominated by the rhythmic sound of the heart monitor that seemed to be the only thing keeping Calder connected to life. Merrick entered slowly, almost afraid to disturb the fragile calm of the environment. His eyes fixed on his brother, who looked even smaller in the hospital bed. Tubes and wires surrounded him, connecting him to machines that monitored every heartbeat, every breath. Calder's skin was pale, almost translucent, and his dark hair was stuck to his forehead due to sweat. His chest rose and fell irregularly, but he was still breathing. Merrick approached slowly, with careful steps, as if any sudden movement could shatter that moment. When he reached the bedside, he held Calder's small hand, which seemed even more fragile than he remembered. "I'm here, little brother. We'll figure this out together. I'll find a way to make everything all right." His voice was low but laden with emotion. He wanted Calder to feel his presence, even if unconscious. On the other side of the room, Dr. Seraphine remained silent for a few moments, watching the brothers. Her heavy, worried eyes betrayed that this moment of truce would be brief. She held a clipboard with such force that her fingers were white. When she finally spoke, her voice was laden with seriousness, and Merrick knew, even before hearing the complete words, that the worst was yet to come. "Merrick, we need to talk about the time we have left, without treatment at the private hospital. Your brother has approximately 1 month to live if he's lucky." Merrick's world seemed to slow down at that moment. The doctor's words echoed in his mind like a death knell, each beat reminding him of the cruel reality. He felt his legs weaken again, but forced himself to stand, gripping the railing of Calder's bed tightly. His fingers turned white from the pressure as he stared at the doctor with wide eyes. 1 month? But how will I get all the money in 1 month? It's impossible. It's impossible, he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and despair. He knew the money was unattainable, but the idea of losing his brother was even more unthinkable. The doctor lowered her eyes, unable to respond with anything that could alleviate his pain. Merrick averted his gaze from her and turned back to Calder. The constant sound of the heart monitor seemed to mock his helplessness, each beep sounding like a relentless countdown. He felt a solitary tear roll down his face, but quickly wiped it away with his arm. He didn't want to appear weak. He couldn't be weak. I'll find a way. There has to be a way to save him, Doctor. I'll get the money, he promised, trying to hide the tears that insisted on running down his cheeks. The way out of the hospital was a blur in his memory. His feet automatically led him out, while his mind spun in a whirlwind of disconnected thoughts. The fresh night air hit his face, but instead of relief it brought only a sense of emptiness, as if the coldness of the outside world reflected the despair within him. He stopped on the sidewalk, looking toward the horizon. The city lights shone in the distance, indifferent to the drama consuming his life. People rushed by, worried about their own problems, not noticing the boy standing there, his face marked by weariness and tears. "My God, how will I do this alone? How will I save my brother?" he muttered to himself, his trembling voice lost in the wind. The words came out like a muffled scream, a question with no answer. He brought his hands to his head, his fingers intertwining his disheveled hair as a sob escaped his throat. "He's all I have. Everything. How will I go on if he's gone? Who will call me brother with that little voice, that laugh that fills the house? I can't lose him too. I've lost everyone." Merrick started pacing in circles, his steps short and irregular. Each memory of Calder hit him like a knife. His brother running through the backyard, asking for help with his homework, crawling under the covers during stormy nights. He trusts me. He thinks I can protect him. How am I going to look him in the eye and tell him I can't do anything? That I can't raise that much money? He doesn't deserve this. He's just a child, he mumbled. The tears started to fall again, but he ignored them, the pain in his voice growing with each word. Calder is all I have left. After Mom left, he was the one who gave me strength. Who made me get out of bed? Who reminded me that there was still something good in the world? He's my family, my responsibility. I promised her. I promised I would take care of him, that I would never let him suffer alone. And now, how will I keep my promise? How will I face the idea that I might fail, that he might not survive? He could barely finish the sentence. The idea was unbearable. His legs weakened and he fell to his knees on the sidewalk, his arms dropping to his sides. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to save him. He sobbed, staring at the ground, the world around him dissolving into a haze of pain. The lights, the sounds, the people. Everything seemed distant, as if he were alone in a dark abyss. If I lose him, I lose everything. He's the only person who still calls me family. I would do anything. Anything to see him well again, to hear him running through the house again, calling me to play, say anything. The words were a painful outburst, laden with fear, guilt, and helplessness. Merrick clenched his fists, the pain in his heart overflowing into a fierce determination. The tears rolled silently down his face as he prayed, his hands clasped together so tightly they were shaking. The crucifix on the altar seemed to watch him with an intensity that made his heart ache even more. The doctor's words echoed in his mind. 1 month, only 1 month. Mom, if you can hear me, help me find a way. I can't lose him too. God, please send me a sign, I beg you. Give me a chance to save him, send me a sign. He pleaded, kneeling on the floor. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a metallic, rhythmic sound. Something was rolling across the stone floor, approaching where Merrick was kneeling. His tear-blurred eyes focused on the object that now stopped at his feet. An empty soda can. Huh? Where did this come from? A soft breeze pushed the can towards the boy's feet, and he picked it up, absent-mindedly turning it between his fingers. The cold aluminum reflected the flickering light, creating tiny dancing spots of light on the walls. His heart, once heavy with despair, began to beat faster with a budding idea. Could this be a sign? The sound of a heavy engine caught his attention. Merrick stood up quickly, still holding the can, and ran out to the street. Outside, a recycling truck was slowly passing by, its hopper full of bags stuffed with cans. The driver, a middle-aged man in a reflective vest, whistled absent-mindedly as he maneuvered the vehicle. Hey, mister, wait a minute. Merrick ran out of the chapel, his legs moving of their own accord. The cold night air stung his face, but he barely felt it. He reached the truck as it stopped at a red light. His hands were shaking as he held up the can, showing it to the driver through the open window. Please, sir, how much is a pound of cans worth? Is it a lot of money? The driver looked at the boy with curiosity, noting his red eyes and rumpled clothes. With a kind smile, he explained the value of the recyclable material, mentioning the collection points and how the selling process worked. Merrick listened intently, his eyes widening with each piece of information. A quick calculation began to form in his mind. If I collect a lot, a whole lot, maybe it'll be enough to get part of the money, he thought, hopeful to follow what seemed to him a divine sign. The light turned green and the truck drove off slowly, leaving Merrick standing on the sidewalk, still clutching the can as if it were a precious treasure. His eyes scanned the street, noticing for the first time the number of commercial establishments around the hospital. Bars, restaurants, diners, all places that discarded cans daily. A glimmer of hope, however small, began to grow in his chest. It's not much, but it's a start, and I promised I would do anything to save you, Calder. The wind blew stronger, carrying with it the distant sound of the machines from the hospital where his brother was fighting for his life. Merrick held the can against his chest, feeling the cold metal against his skin as a reminder of what he needed to do. His tears had dried, replaced by a fierce determination that shone in his eyes. God sent me a sign, and I won't waste this chance. I'll collect every can in this city if I have to. Merrick began his journey that same night, roaming the streets of the neighborhood with an empty trash bag in his hands. The dark sky was his only witness as he rummaged through trash cans and flower beds, collecting every can he found. His fingers, already bruised by the metal, trembled with cold and anxiety. The thought of Calder in the hospital gave him strength to keep going, even when his back ached from bending over so many times. As he picked up another can, he mumbled to himself, as if talking to his brother. "You know, Calder, Mom always said that God writes straight with crooked lines. When that first can rolled up to my feet in the chapel, I knew it was a sign from him. And now every can I find seems to tell me I'm on the right path." The nights turned into an exhausting routine. During the day, Merrick visited Calder at the hospital, telling cheerful stories and hiding his bruised hands under the bedsheets. At night, he transformed into a silent shadow, scouring every corner of the city in search of his aluminum treasure. The security guards at the establishments already knew him. Some even set aside the cans for him. On one of those nights, as he counted the result of his collection, his tears mingled with the coins in his hands. "It's too little. Still too little. I need more time, Calder. Please hang in there. Your big brother will find a way. I promise. I can't lose you. I can't." It was during one of his nightly searches that Merrick discovered the Aurora Building, an imposing corporate skyscraper in the city center. Hidden in the shadows, he observed the intense movements of well-dressed people entering and leaving, waiters carrying trays, and most importantly, dozens of cans being discarded at every event. His eyes shone with new hope as he whispered, There must be more cans in one night than I can collect in an entire week on the streets, if I could get in there after the events. But how? How will I get past security without being caught?" he asked himself. For hours, Merrick studied the building's routine. He discovered that every Thursday, there was an important event in the main hall on the 10th floor. Hidden behind a tree across the street, he carefully observed every detail. The guards' schedules, shift changes, service entrances. His hands clutched the old notebook where he jotted down his observations, as he mumbled anxiously, "I need to memorize everything. Every move, every time. One mistake could cost Calder's life. I can't fail. I can't get caught. This may be my only chance to get enough money." The opportunity arose sooner than he expected. A huge poster announced a charity gala for the following day. Merrick felt his heart race as he read the details of the event. Hundreds of guests, full bar service. Everything indicated it would be his big chance. As he planned his entry, he spoke to himself in a low voice. "It's going to be perfect. They'll be so busy with the party that they won't notice a boy coming in through the back. And after everyone leaves, I'll be able to get all the cans. All of them, Calder. You'll see. I'll make it." The following hours were dedicated to refining his plan. Merrick discovered a dimly lit emergency staircase that led to the rooftop of the neighboring building. From there, he could clearly see the movement of the Aurora Building without being noticed. With a crumpled piece of paper, he drew makeshift maps and escape routes, mumbling as he scribbled, "If I enter through the service door at 11 o'clock, when the waiters start cleaning, I can hide in the storage room until everyone leaves. Then it's just a matter of waiting for the right moment. God help me not get caught. I can't fail. I can't." The following night, carrying a mixture of fear and determination, Merrick spent the afternoon at the hospital, holding Calder's hand and trying to keep his voice steady as he told superhero stories. His brother was paler, weaker, and that only increased his urgency. Before leaving, he kissed his brother's forehead and whispered with a choked voice, "Today will be different, little bro. Today I'm going to find a way to help you. You trust your big brother, don't you? I promise that when you wake up tomorrow, I'll have good news. God is watching over us." At night, positioned at his observation point, Merrick watched as the guests arrived in their luxurious cars. The sound of music and laughter echoed through the street, while he waited patiently in the shadows, his heart beating so hard it seemed like it would explode. His sweaty hands clutched the empty backpack he carried as he whispered a prayer. "God, if you're watching me now, protect me. I'm not doing this out of malice, I just want to save Calder. Please, don't let anything go wrong." The clock was almost 11 at night when Merrick saw the first signs that the party was winding down. Guests started to leave, and staff circulated more frequently through the service entrance. "God, if this is the way to save my brother, please give me a sign. I know you have many important things to do, but it's my brother. I need him. Tell me, Lord, if this is where I should come." The boy prayed with such faith when something unexpected happened. An empty can fell from the sky, rolling straight to his feet, exactly as it had happened in the hospital chapel. His hands trembled as he picked it up. Another sign. Just like the first one. "It can't be a coincidence. It's you, isn't it, dear God? Telling me it's okay that I should go on?" With renewed courage after what he considered a divine sign, Merrick approached the service entrance. He waited for a group of waiters to exit carrying empty trays, and at a moment of distraction from the security guard, he managed to slip inside. His heart was beating so hard in his chest that he feared the sound would give him away. As he moved silently through the dimly lit hallways, he repeated to himself like a mantra, "For you, Calder. Every step, every risk is for you. I won't let you leave. I won't let you be alone like we were when Mom left." The interior of the building was a labyrinth of identical corridors and doors. Merrick moved like a shadow, guiding himself by the signage and the distant noise of the party above. He found a service staircase and began to climb, stopping at every suspicious sound. His hands trembled as he gripped the railing, and his breathing was heavy when he finally reached the 10th floor. Through a crack in the door, he could see the ballroom where the party was taking place. "It's much bigger than I imagined. There must be hundreds of cans in there. I just need to wait a little longer, just a little longer, and everyone will leave." He found a small supply closet and hid there among buckets and brooms. Time seemed to drag on as he listened to the movement of the party gradually diminishing. His thoughts wandered to Calder, alone in the hospital, struggling to breathe. A tear rolled down his face as he whispered into the darkness, "I'm scared, God. Very scared. But my mom always used to say that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what needs to be done even when you're afraid. And I need to do this. I need to save him." Silence finally took hold of the building. There was only one group of distracted businessmen who weren't paying attention to the boy, animatedly discussing business. Merrick waited a few more minutes, his heart pounding against his ribs, before daring to leave his hiding place. With calculated steps, he moved towards the ballroom, catching glimpses of the dozens of cans scattered across the tables. His eyes shone with hope as he whispered, "I made it. I finally made it. With all these cans, I'll be able to help Calder. I just need to be quick and—" His words were interrupted by a beam of light that cut through the darkness. A guard was making his rounds earlier than expected. Merrick froze in place, his heart stopping for an instant. The flashlight beam danced perilously close to him, and the sound of the guard's footsteps echoed through the empty ballroom. In panic, he threw himself under one of the tables, covering his mouth with his hands to silence his gasping breaths. His wide eyes fixed on the guard's approaching feet. "Please, God, please don't let him see me. Calder needs me. He needs me." The flashlight beam passed inches away from where Merrick was hiding, briefly illuminating his crouched legs under the tablecloth. The guard stopped, as if he had noticed something strange. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of traffic outside and the frantic beating of Merrick's heart. He held his breath, his fingers gripping the fabric of his pants tightly, as a single prayer echoed in his mind. "God, if you still look after me up there, help me now. I can't be caught. I can't fail Calder. Please protect me. Protect me." The sound of the security guard's footsteps gradually faded, echoing further and further down the terrace hallway. Merrick remained motionless under the tablecloth, every beat of his heart pounding so loudly it seemed to give away his position. Sweat trickled down his forehead, mixing with the silent tears he had held back all night. Only when the last echo of the footsteps had completely disappeared did he dare to move. His muscles ached from the time he spent crouched, and his hands shook so much that he had difficulty pushing the cloth aside. With careful movements, he made sure once again that he was alone. That was close, Bas, very close, but I can't give up now. The cans from this party could be worth a lot of money. With his heart still racing, Merrick emerged from his hiding place like a startled cat, his watchful eyes scanning the surroundings. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound seemed amplified in the silence of the terrace. He walked with light, almost imperceptible steps between the event tables. The moonlight partially illuminated the space, creating a dance of shadows that moved with the night breeze. He knew he had to be quick, but also careful. Any careless movement could ruin his plan. If I can just fill 2 more bags, maybe that will be enough to pay for at least one test for Calder. The scent of the party still lingered in the air, a mixture of expensive food, champagne, and pricey perfumes. Merrick headed behind a decorative structure near the railing, a safe place to observe without being noticed. The terrace was almost empty, except for a few staff finishing the cleanup. He held the bag he had already filled with cans found in the darkest corners of the space, its weight a promise of hope. I just need to wait a little longer. Just until these men are done. There must be hundreds of cans here. Suddenly, the sound of male voices caught his attention. Merrick crouched even lower, holding his breath as 3 men emerged onto the terrace. They wore expensive suits, and their loud laughter cut through the night air. They carried champagne flutes and seemed relaxed, celebrating something important. The tallest of them, a middle-aged man with neatly trimmed grey hair, walked up to the railing and stopped to admire the view. "This is the perfect moment to toast our success, gentlemen. From atop this terrace we can see the entire empire we've built." His voice was laden with satisfaction. Merrick watched them intently, his heart gripped. While those men toasted and smiled, his brother was in a hospital struggling to breathe. The injustice ate away at him from the inside, but he forced himself to look away and focus on his goal. It was then that he noticed something strange. The screw holding part of the railing was loose. It didn't seem like a major problem at first glance, but with the weight of the man leaning on it, the metal was beginning to give way. Merrick felt panic rising up his spine. My God, this won't hold. He needs to get out of there now. The sound of the screw coming loose was almost imperceptible, but Merrick heard it clearly. He widened his eyes, seeing the railing tilt slightly. The man didn't seem to notice the danger. He continued leaning, laughing with his friends. "No! Watch out!" Merrick shouted, his voice echoing across the terrace. He launched himself out of his hiding place, his feet moving on pure instinct. Each step seemed to last an eternity as he ran towards the man, his hands outstretched, as if he could prevent the inevitable. The railing gave way with a loud snap, followed by a scream from the man that cut through the silence of the night. Merrick arrived just as the man began to fall, grabbing his arm with all the strength he could muster. The force of the impact nearly pulled Merrick off the ground, the jerk causing his feet to slide a few inches forward. "Hold on tight! Please hold on tight!" he shouted, his words laden with despair. The man was with his entire body about to fall from the building, only the boy's hands preventing him from falling. Harlan's weight was crushing. Merrick felt his thin arms tremble, every muscle burning as if it were about to give way. The strong wind at that height seemed to ally itself with gravity, pushing them both towards a fatal fall. The boy dug his feet into the ground, trying to find some traction on the smooth terrace floor. His small hands held the man's arm with such force that his fingers turned white. "Look at me! Don't look down! Look at me!" he ordered, his voice laden with urgency. The other businessmen were paralyzed as if time had frozen for them. Champagne flutes slipped from their hands, shattering on the floor, but no one seemed willing to act. The sound of the wind mingled with Harlan's screams, creating a chaotic atmosphere. "Someone help me! I won't be able to hold on much longer!" Merrick shouted again, feeling the despair intensify. The man began to struggle, making the situation even more precarious. Merrick felt his feet sliding again, each movement bringing him closer to the destroyed railing. He thought of Calder, of his promise to do anything to save him. It was ironic, but now it seemed he was about to lose everything trying to save someone else. "Please, sir, stop moving. I promise I won't let you go, but you have to trust me," he said, his voice almost breaking. Sweat poured down Merrick's face, getting into his eyes and blurring his vision. He blinked frantically, trying to ignore the burning sensation as he held Harlan with every ounce of strength he had left. His worn shoes began to lose traction, sliding across the smooth floor. The void behind him seemed to beckon him, but Merrick refused to give in. He tightened his grip on the man's arm even further, feeling the expensive suit fabric tear under his fingers. "I won't let you go. You're going to make it out of this, but please help me help you." The wind howled around them as if mocking the scene. The city lights glowed in the distance, blinking like stars Merrick would never reach if he fell. Every second seemed an eternity, every beat of his heart a superhuman effort to keep fighting. "If I fall, at least I'll fall trying to save someone," he thought, his jaw clenched tightly. The muscles in his arms burned as if they were being consumed by an intense fire, every fiber of his body screaming for relief. His lungs were aflame, desperately begging for air while Merrick pulled from every ounce of strength he could find in his small body. The pain seemed to invade even his mind, clouding his thoughts and making every second a battle not to give in. He looked at Harlan, who was still crying in terror, his tears mingling with the sweat pouring profusely down his face. The man hanging in the void seemed heavier with each passing moment, and his wide, terror-stricken eyes were fixed on Merrick's. For a moment, Merrick saw something familiar in Harlan's expression, a reflection of the very fear that consumed him. The glimmer of hope he noticed in the man's gaze seemed both a plea and an accusation. He couldn't fail. He couldn't let go. "Please, sir, don't give up. I'm here. I won't let you fall." Merrick tried to shout, but his voice came out weak, almost swallowed by the sound of the howling wind around them. Harlan's weight was an relentless force, dragging Merrick ever closer to the destroyed railing. His feet, in worn and slippery shoes, slid inch by inch across the smooth floor, dangerously bringing him closer to the abyss. The man's body slipped down a little more, as did Merrick's, leaving him even closer to the fall. The boy tried to dig his heels into the ground, but it seemed futile. The floor appeared to offer no resistance, as if conspiring against him. His hands gripping Harlan's arm were starting to tingle, and he felt his fingers threaten to open involuntarily. "No, I can't let go. Not now," he whispered to himself, determination fighting to overcome panic. Merrick's breathing was erratic, panting, mixed with small sobs that he could no longer contain. Every gasp of air seemed insufficient, as if the oxygen escaped before reaching his lungs. He tried to gather strength to pull the man up, but he was too heavy and his fatigue was overwhelming. Harlan's weight increased, as if gravity was intensifying just to defeat him. The man struggled involuntarily, panicking, his uncoordinated movements making everything even more difficult. "Stop! Please, stop moving!" Merrick shouted, but his voice almost disappeared amid the roar of the wind. His vision began to blur, tears and sweat making it impossible to see clearly. Harlan's face, once sharp, now seemed a blur, but Merrick could still hear his desperate murmurs. "Pull me up. Please, boy. Save me." The plea was a knife plunged into Merrick's heart, who felt the crushing weight of responsibility on his shoulders. But reality was cruel. He was at his limit. His arms trembled so much that they seemed about to give way, and his feet, now almost at the edge, slipped a little more. Merrick felt the chill of the void behind him, a warning that he was dangerously close to being swallowed by the abyss too. A sob escaped his lips, mixed with a muffled cry of frustration and despair. "Calder, I promised. I'm sorry. I won't make it." Guilt and determination dueled within him, but time was not on his side. Merrick's desperate scream echoed across the rooftop, a sound that cut through the air like a sharp blade, laden with anguish and despair. It reverberated between the tall buildings, breaking the silence of the night and drawing the attention of the guards who, until then, had been too far away to intervene. Merrick felt his arms trembling as if made of paper, unable to bear Harlan's weight for much longer. Every second that passed was a battle against the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm him. Sweat streamed down his face, mingling with the hot tears that fell uncontrollably, as he gritted his teeth to avoid screaming again. The cold night wind whipped his hair, but he barely noticed the surroundings. His only concern was the man he held with all the strength he had left. "Please, I won't make it much longer," Merrick shouted, his voice choked with fear and helplessness. He felt Harlan's fingers gradually slipping from his sweaty hands, as if fate was mocking his efforts. The weight of the businessman dangling over the abyss seemed to multiply with every second, crushing his resistance. "Grab him! Do something!" Merrick pleaded, his desperate gaze fixed on the guards who had finally arrived. The first guard, a burly man with a face marked by experience and the tension of the moment, ran to the edge of the rooftop. His deep, urgent voice cut through the sound of Merrick's labored breathing. "Mr. Harlan, grab my hand. We're getting you out of there right now," he shouted, reaching out as far as he could. Merrick's eyes were wide, filled with tears that threatened to blur his vision. "Quick, please, I can't hold him anymore." His voice came out in a broken sob as his arms protested with a searing pain. The following seconds seemed like an eternity. 2 more guards joined the first, quickly forming a human chain. It was an improvised but synchronized choreography dictated by the gravity of the moment. They positioned themselves strategically, each one contributing a desperate effort to reach Harlan. Meanwhile, Merrick gritted his teeth, his muscles burning in agony, but he dared not let go. "Hold on tight, boy." "Don't let go yet, we're almost there," ordered one of the guards. Merrick, his face red with effort and tears, shouted, "I'm trying, but I don't know if I can hold on much longer." The sound of the city below seemed to have disappeared completely. There were no horns, no voices, no wind. All that remained was Merrick's panting breath and the guards' urgent commands. Finally, with a coordinated tug and a joint effort, the men managed to grab Harlan's arms. The relief was immediate, but Merrick still couldn't allow himself to relax. He kept holding on with all his might even when he realized the weight in his hands had lessened. "You can let go now, boy. We've got him," assured the burly guard. Trembling with exhaustion, Merrick finally obeyed, his arms dropping limply to his sides as if made of lead. With one final pull, Harlan was hauled back to the safety of the rooftop. He fell to his knees on the ground, panting and sweating, while Merrick collapsed backward. The boy felt his legs give way under him, unable to support the weight of his own body any longer. He lay there on the cold floor, his chest rising and falling uncontrollably as he tried to catch his breath. His eyes closed, and he whispered a silent prayer. "Thank you, my God. Thank you for saving us." Harlan, still shaky and breathless, dragged himself over to where Merrick lay. The businessman seemed a different man, as if fear and gratitude had wiped away any traces of arrogance that might have existed before. He looked at Merrick for a few moments, his heavy breathing mingling with the sound of the wind. He studied the boy intently, noticing his simple clothes and calloused hands that trembled with exhaustion. You risked your own life to save me. Why? You don't even know me." His voice was hoarse, still laden with the emotion of the moment. Merrick opened his eyes slowly, his expression marked by fatigue and sincerity. "Any life is worth saving, sir. My mother always taught me that," he replied, his voice low but firm. He averted his gaze for a moment, unable to sustain the weight of gratitude in Harlan's eyes. The guards had stepped back a few paces, giving space to the businessman and his young savior. It was as if the world around had disappeared, leaving only the 2 of them on the terrace. Harlan, trying to organize his thoughts, rose with difficulty, straightening his rumpled suit. His expression oscillated between admiration and confusion, as if he were struggling to comprehend not only what had happened, but also who that boy was who had saved him. "Get up, please. I want to look into the eyes of the person who saved my life. I owe you a debt," he asked, extending his hand. Merrick hesitated for a moment, but eventually accepted the help. "You don't owe me anything. I just did what anyone would do," said the boy, his voice almost a whisper. "No, boy, you did something extraordinary," Harlan declared firmly, placing his hands on Merrick's shoulders. The businessman looked directly into the boy's eyes, searching for something he himself could not explain. "And I need to repay you somehow. Ask for anything, anything. Money is not a problem," he continued, his voice laden with emotion. Merrick felt his heart race. The sudden hope that took hold of his chest was almost overwhelming. He swallowed hard, trying to muster up courage to speak. You're serious? Anything at all?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Harlan nodded, taking his wallet out of his pocket. "Anything. You not only saved my life, you saved the future of my company and the livelihood of hundreds of families. There is no price for that," he stated. Merrick took a deep breath, gathering every ounce of courage he had. $3 million. That's what I want, he finally said. The silence that followed was deafening. Harlan was surprised, not by the amount but by the precision of the request. He studied Merrick's face, trying to decipher the urgency in his eyes. $3 million? Not a penny more, not a penny less, he questioned, intrigued. Exactly that, sir. It's the amount I need, Merrick replied, his voice firm despite the storm raging within him. Without saying another word, Harlan took out a black card from his wallet and a briefcase of money. He extended them to Merrick, saying, "This card is yours to keep from now on. Use it as you need. This money doesn't have the full amount you need, but you can use it too." The boy took the card and the briefcase with trembling hands, almost unable to believe what was happening. You don't want to know what the money is for?" Merrick asked, even more surprised by the businessman's attitude. Harlan smiled slightly, adjusting his tie. "If you wanted to tell me, you would have already said. Whatever the reason is, it must be something important to make you risk so much tonight," he replied. Merrick held the card and the briefcase against his chest, as if it were the most precious thing he had ever touched in his entire life. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, not only from the strenuous effort he had just endured, but from the torrent of emotions that seemed to overwhelm him at that moment. Hot tears streamed down his face, mingling with the sweat and dirt of a day he never imagined would end like this. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to control the sob that threatened to escape, but to no avail. Each tear carried the weight of every moment of despair he had ever faced, as if in that simple gesture of generosity, Harlan had untied a knot in his heart. Thank you so much," he whispered, his voice hoarse and choked with the emotions that overwhelmed him. He wanted to say more, much more, but the words seemed insufficient. How could he explain the gratitude he felt? How could he translate into words the relief that seemed to take hold of every cell of his body, the warmth that spread through his chest like a flame he had long believed had gone out? His lips parted, trying to continue, but all he could manage was to mumble, "You don't know, you can't imagine," he began to say, and suddenly put his arms around the millionaire, hugging him, trying to convey the gratitude he felt. Then he looked at Harlan, but not directly into his eyes. It was as if he didn't feel worthy of meeting the gaze of the man who had given him not just a piece of plastic, but a chance, an opportunity to change the course of his life and his brother's. Merrick felt the weight of gratitude crushing him, and at the same time lifting him up in an almost paradoxical way. He wanted to say something that did justice to the magnitude of that moment, but he knew that no word would be able to convey everything he felt. His legs faltered for an instant, almost unable to support him. The card and briefcase pressed against his chest seemed to pulse along with his heart, which was beating so fast that he thought he might faint. He opened his mouth again, seeking strength to continue, but his voice broke into a loud and unexpected sob. "Thank you," he repeated once more because it was all he could say. It was simple, but it carried the weight of all the sleepless nights, of all the times he had begged for a miracle. He tilted his head slightly, in a gesture that mixed humility and reverence. The words he couldn't say were written on his face, in every tear that fell and every trembling breath he took. With a hesitant motion, Merrick took a step back, still clutching the briefcase as if it were his lifeline. He wanted to stay there, but knew he couldn't. If he lingered for a second longer, he might crumble completely. Before he could allow himself to hesitate, he turned abruptly and began to run. Each step seemed laden with emotion, his feet barely touching the ground as he moved away, as if the impulse of his gratitude was carrying him off. The tears wouldn't stop falling, dampening his face as he ran, and his chest continued to burn with a mixture of relief, hope, and an emotion he couldn't name. The night breeze struck his face, drying the falling tears, but there was nothing that could wipe away the shy smile that was beginning to form on his lips. As he passed through the terrace door without looking back, the only thing echoing in his mind were those words he had repeated so many times. Thank you so much, my God." Harlan watched Merrick disappear, a growing curiosity burning inside him. "There's something more going on here," he muttered, giving orders to follow the boy. He turned to the lit-up city, his mind already plotting the next steps. "I'm going to uncover your story, kid. Not out of distrust, but because something tells me there's more goodness to this tale than I imagine." Minutes later, Harlan's black car advanced almost like a silent predator through the city streets, keeping a calculated distance from the running boy ahead. The millionaire, still in his rumpled suit from the chaotic day he'd had, felt the cold leather of the steering wheel under his fingers, which drummed incessantly, reflecting the whirlwind of thoughts in his mind. His eyes followed Merrick through the tinted glass as the boy strode forward with quick but determined steps. Each turn, each street seemed part of an invisible map Merrick knew all too well. How can he know so much about a place like this? Harlan wondered, lightly biting his lower lip as unease grew. There's something off here, a boy that young alone. The streets gradually but undeniably changed. The imposing buildings, with well-kept facades and lights radiating sophistication, gave way to dilapidated structures, with broken windows and fronts bearing the marks of neglect. The once immaculate pavement was now uneven, riddled with potholes that made the car sway with every meter. Groups of people leaning against corners looked at the black car with suspicious, even hostile stares. Harlan's nervousness grew with each lingering look at the vehicle. I shouldn't be here, let alone him. What would a kid like Merrick be doing in a place like this? It makes no sense. The air seemed heavier, laden with a tension that only increased as they moved toward the outskirts. Then Merrick disappeared around a particularly shadowy corner. Harlan squinted, recognizing the name of the street that glowed under a faint, flickering light, Devil's Alley. The sound of that name echoed in his mind like an alarm. He knew exactly what that meant. It was a notorious meeting point for illegal dealings in the area, where illicit negotiations took place in broad daylight, or worse, at night. A shiver ran down his spine, and he slowed down even more, turning off the headlights in hopes of going unnoticed. The car advanced like a shadow, but Harlan's heart beat like an unsteady drum. Why did he choose this place? Harlan wondered, the fear now evident in his eyes. Could it be? Could he be using the money for drugs? The alley was surrounded by graffitied walls, disconnected phrases mixed with grotesque images that seemed alive in the dim light of the street lamps. Tattered posters swayed in the wind, each movement casting even more distorted shadows. Harlan found a strategic spot to park, where he could observe Merrick without being noticed. His mind spun with dark possibilities, all of them ending with the same crushing tightness in his chest. The boy kept walking, but his once confident stride showed signs of hesitation. He looked smaller, more fragile under the unstable lights of the alley. Why is he here? Harlan repeated to himself, frustration taking the place of concern. He's too young for this. But what if he's been forced? What if someone's manipulating him? An unexpected movement made Harlan hold his breath. A black cat darted across the alley, leaping from a pile of trash to the opposite sidewalk. Merrick jumped back, his hand instinctively going to his chest, as if to control his racing heartbeat. The scene seemed trivial, but to Harlan, it was a glaring reminder of the boy's vulnerability. The surrounding environment, however, was anything but trivial. An empty bottle fell from a nearby trash can, the sound echoing like an explosion in the oppressive silence. Harlan gripped the steering wheel tighter, feeling the knuckles turn white. He knew he couldn't intervene yet, but how much longer could he wait? Suddenly, the sound of footsteps, not Merrick's. Harlan saw three figures emerge from the shadows, their large and menacing bodies advancing toward the boy. They weren't just passing through the alley, they were waiting. Harlan felt his heart race, his breathing becoming short and rapid. He leaned forward on the bench, his eyes fixed on the scene ahead. This can't be happening. They're going to hurt him. Or worse. His hand immediately went to the door handle, ready to intervene, but he hesitated. The men were empty of visible weapons, and their approach wasn't typical of thugs. Still, something in Harlan's eyes told him he should act. But what if I make things worse? 3 against 1, so what can I really do? The figures approached, forming a triangle of intimidation around Merrick, who was now completely surrounded. Even from afar, Harlan could feel the shift in the boy's posture. The shoulders that were once raised dropped, and the boy took a step back. "No," Harlan muttered, feeling the despair growing inside him. The alley seemed alive, the distorted shadows making everything even more sinister. Why is he so quiet? Why doesn't he try to escape? He wanted to shout, wanted to get out of the car and pull the boy away from that place, but he panicked and couldn't move. The largest of the men stepped forward, his figure standing out against the irregular background of the alley. Merrick stood still, his small fists clenched at his sides. Still, it was visible that he was trembling. Harlan realized this with a tightening in his chest. He's trying to be brave, trying not to show fear, but I can feel the terror he must be feeling, thought Harlan. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Harlan felt a drop of sweat run down his temple as each second seemed to stretch into an unbearable eternity. The sound of a can rolling across the floor made everyone turn. The metallic noise echoed, cutting through the oppressive silence. Merrick took the opportunity to slowly move his hand toward his pocket, where Harlan knew he had stashed the card, and extended the briefcase in front of him. He's not going to, Harlan began to think, but stopped. It was obvious what Merrick intended to do, but why? The boy seemed so calm, almost calculated, even surrounded by threats. Does he know what he's doing? Harlan wondered, feeling a mix of admiration and panic. The moon disappeared behind a thick cloud, plunging the alley into near-total darkness. Harlan strained his eyes, trying not to lose sight of Merrick. The boy was motionless now, like a statue, as the three men drew even closer. Their shadows seemed to grow, merging into the graffiti-covered walls. This isn't normal. None of this is normal. Harlan felt his stomach churn, panic beginning to take over his mind. I should have acted earlier. If something happens to him, it will be my fault. The silence was broken again, but this time by something more sinister. The largest of the men, emerging from the shadows, approached Merrick. The boy startled, taking a step back. The scene made Harlan's blood run cold. His entire body tensed like a coiled spring about to snap. "Enough!" he roared, his voice filling the inside of the car as his hand finally turned the door handle. Harlan watched, still seated in the driver's seat, as Merrick walked with the three men down the dark streets. The silence of the car seemed to amplify the sounds outside, the rustling of the wind in the trees, the occasional snap of a dry twig under one of the men's feet. His eyes were fixed on the small figure of the boy, who seemed even more fragile between the sturdy silhouettes that accompanied him. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, the leather creaking under the pressure of his fingers. His heart raced and his mind tried to understand what was happening. If they were going to hurt him, they would have done it by now. So what is this? A game? A trap? He thought, his stomach knotted. The way the men walked now, close to Merrick, began to shift something in Harlan's perception. It was no longer the menacing stride of predators, but a kind of synchronicity, almost a silent dance. Their gestures didn't have the calculated stiffness of criminals, but an awkward fluidity, as if they were being carried by something greater than themselves. This isn't normal, Harlan muttered to himself, adjusting the rearview mirror. His eyes tried to catch something on those men's faces, but the darkness and the angle prevented him. They seem familiar? The dark street opened onto a dimly lit square. The faint light from the lampposts revealed details that had previously been hidden. Harlan squinted, trying to decipher what he saw. The man on the left held a worn rosary between his fingers, moving them slowly as if counting a silent prayer. The one in the middle carried a tattered briefcase under his arm, while the third, the most robust, had his hands stuffed in his pockets, but his posture was not aggressive. He simply looked weary, like someone carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. They're ordinary people, not thugs, Harlan concluded, the shock hitting him like a cold wave. He felt a fool for having imagined the worst. Merrick led the group into the lobby of a hospital, his brisk stride suggesting urgency. The boy seemed to know exactly where to go, moving with the confidence of someone who had been there many times before. Harlan parked the car across the street, turning off the engine and killing the lights to avoid drawing attention. The hospital appeared to be asleep, with the heavy silence of the early morning hours dominating the atmosphere. Yet there was something profoundly alive in the scene unfolding before him. Why is he coming here? Why would this boy bring these men to a hospital? Harlan wondered, struggling against the swirl of emotions that washed over him. Harlan got out of his car and began to follow them discreetly, unnoticed by them. The boy led the group to a more secluded area near the hospital's small chapel. Harlan moved carefully, as if afraid to shatter the delicate stillness of the night. He hid behind a column, watching intently as Merrick opened the briefcase. The boy's hands trembled slightly as he removed the money and arranged it on the concrete bench, pulling out the bills. This is for Maria's medicine. This is for Pedro's tests. And this is for Lucas's treatment, Merrick said, his voice low but firm with a determination that made Harlan's heart ache. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The boy was distributing the reward money he had received, dividing it meticulously among the men who now watched him in almost reverent silence. The men remained motionless, but there was something sacred in the way they looked at Merrick. It was as if he was more than just a boy, a sort of guide, an embodiment of hope. The man holding the rosary continued to murmur something Harlan couldn't make out, while the tallest of them pulled a photograph from his pocket. Even from a distance, Harlan could see it was an image of a child in a hospital bed. The dim light reflected off the tears streaming down the man's face as he extended the photo to Merrick, who took it carefully, almost as if holding something too precious to be touched. These are the parents of the sick children. Oh God, how could I have judged them so hastily? Harlan thought, crushed by the realization. Merrick counted the bills, consulting the medical records the parents had handed him with a precision that seemed unlikely for someone so young. He verified the names and amounts, handing out envelopes one by one with clear instructions. Please keep receipts for everything. Every penny needs to go towards the children's treatment. We can't waste anything, he said, his voice carrying a surprising authority. Harlan felt a lump in his throat. There was something profoundly admirable and painful about that scene. The boy shouldn't have to bear that kind of responsibility. He shouldn't be the pillar for so many fragile lives. Suddenly, a nurse walked down the corridor and looked at the group in the hospital chapel, recognizing one of them. She approached the first man, the tallest in the group, and asked to speak with him privately for a moment. When they finished, the man suddenly fell to his knees, his hands covering his face as he began to sob. His anguished cries echoed through the night, deep and laden with pain. Harlan took an instinctive step forward but stopped when he saw the other two men kneel beside him, offering silent comfort. "My Anna, my little Anna," the man murmured between sobs. His voice carried a sorrow that made Harlan shudder. That father's grief was palpable, like a physical weight in the air. Merrick knelt beside him, placing a comforting hand on his back. Yet the boy's face was pale, his eyes reflecting a mixture of sadness and helplessness. "What's happening?" Harlan whispered to himself, his heart pounding so loudly he feared the others might hear it. He wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Something told him that whatever it was, it would be devastating. She didn't make it. Just now, she passed away, the man finally managed to say, clutching the girl's photograph with trembling hands. His words shattered something in the air like a dam collapsing. Merrick stumbled backward, his small shoulders shaking under the weight of that revelation. The envelope he held slipped from his fingers, and the banknotes scattered across the floor. But nobody moved to retrieve them. The moment was too big, too tragic to be interrupted by something so mundane. "No, it can't be. I thought I could help. I promised myself I would try to save them all," Merrick murmured, his voice broken by pain. His words cut Harlan like a blade, each syllable echoing in his mind. The businessman wanted to run to the boy, to hold him, to tell him it wasn't his fault, that he was already doing more than anyone could ever expect. But he was paralyzed, unable to move a muscle as the scene unfolded. The moon emerged from behind the clouds outside the chapel window, bathing the small group in a silvery light. It was an image both beautiful and devastating, a moment of shared anguish that seemed to transcend time and space. The kneeling man continued to sob, clutching his daughter's photograph with trembling hands. She just wanted to see another birthday. She just wanted one more chance, he said, his voice quavering under the weight of tragedy. Harlan felt tears burn his eyes, but he didn't let them fall. His fists clenched at his sides as if that could contain the avalanche of emotions that threatened to overflow. He looked at Merrick, that small and frail boy whose presence seemed immense before the scene. There was something almost supernatural in the way Merrick touched the shoulder of the crying man, as if his gesture carried a weight and comfort that words could never convey. My God, what did I do judging this boy? What lesson is he teaching me? Thought Harlan, swallowing hard, feeling his chest tighten with a mixture of shame and admiration. The distant sound of sirens floated in the air, a melancholic noise for that moment of raw and painful humanity. Harlan remained where he was, as if afraid of breaking the fragile connection that united those people. His feet were glued to the ground, and he wondered if he had the right to intervene. He knew deep down that that moment was bigger than him, bigger than any words he could say. It was proof that even in the deepest suffering, kindness and hope could still exist. and that he, Harlan, still had much to learn about what really mattered in life. After the painful moment, everyone knelt around the man who remained on his knees. They did what they could to say words of strength, until a woman entered the chapel, her eyes bathed in tears. She was the girl's mother, and everyone left the couple alone. Merrick said goodbye to the men with tight hugs and whispered words of comfort. Harlan remained in the hallway for a few more seconds, watching the boy wipe away tears with the sleeve of his tattered shirt. There was something overwhelming about the scene. That small, frail body, bent by the weight of responsibilities that no adult should bear, let alone a child. Merrick adjusted the bag in his hands and headed towards the entrance of the children's ward with firm steps, as if carrying a purpose that gave him strength. Each step seemed to resonate with an echo of determination, as if the boy were marching towards a divine mission. Harlan couldn't stand still. He followed the boy, the cold of the hospital's air conditioning cutting his skin like razors, but the feeling of restlessness in his chest was much worse. How can someone so young carry so much responsibility, so much love? He whispered to himself as he adjusted his coat and began to follow Merrick at a safe distance. The corridors of the children's ward seemed endless under the fluorescent lights that emitted a cold and impersonal glow. It was as if the entire hospital had been frozen in time, each corner carrying stories that would never be fully told. Harlan could smell the characteristic scent of disinfectant mixed with dry, conditioned air. Merrick walked with an impressive familiarity, as if he were part of the place. He discreetly waved to the night shift nurses, and some of them responded with tired but affectionate smiles. How many times has he been here? How many nights has he spent walking these halls, caring for everyone but himself? Thought Harlan, hiding behind pillars and medication carts as he continued to follow the boy. On the first stop, Merrick entered a small room decorated with colorful drawings pinned to the walls. A mother held a baby connected to tubes and monitors, rocking him silently. Harlan peeked through the crack in the door, unable to look away from the interaction. Merrick opened his backpack and took out a tattered notebook, his expression laden with seriousness. When he began to speak, his voice was low but clear and the words flowed with a disconcerting precision. I managed to get in touch with a specialist doctor nearby. He agreed to do a consultation for a symbolic fee to discuss your son's case. You just need to gather the latest tests. The tone was professional, as if he were a trained adult, but there was a softness in his words that made it clear how much he cared. Harlan held his breath. The scene seemed surreal. How does this kid know about specialists? How does he speak with such authority? This doesn't make sense, he thought. But as he looked at the mother's face, which seemed to find a shred of hope in Merrick's words, Harlan realized that the how didn't matter there. All that mattered was that Merrick was making a difference. In the next room, two children occupied the beds. One slept deeply, while the other played with a well-worn stuffed bear. A man sat in an uncomfortable chair beside them. As Merrick entered, he stood up immediately, the exhaustion on his face replaced by palpable relief. Merrick took out another envelope from his backpack, handing it over along with a detailed list of instructions. I set aside this money for your children's medication for the next week. There's a pharmacy downtown that gives a discount if you show the hospital prescription. The address is here, he explained, pointing to the list. Harlan felt a lump in his throat when he saw Merrick kneel beside the bed of the awake child. With a small smile, he took a toy car from his pocket, probably bought with his savings. The child's expression lit up immediately, as if for a brief moment all the wires and tubes connected to his small body disappeared. I brought you a present I found while collecting cans, so you won't be sad about the shots. But you can only play after taking all your medicine, deal? The response was an enthusiastic nod, accompanied by a smile that seemed to warm the entire room. Harlan leaned against the wall, closing his eyes for a moment. How can someone have so much light in such a dark place? He thought, feeling the weight of his emotions tighten his chest. He opened his eyes again just in time to see Merrick organizing the notes in his notebook, writing quickly while checking the charts hanging on the beds. Each line was filled with medical information, names, and treatment values. He's coordinating everything by himself. That's not fair, he's still just a boy. Merrick's steps echoed through the corridors as he bid farewell to the room and went to meet an elderly lady who was waiting for him in the hallway. Her wrinkled hands clutched a rosary, and her eyes were brimming with tears. Merrick hugged her affectionately, handing her an envelope thicker than the previous ones. "I know the surgery is expensive, ma'am, but your granddaughter will make it. God wouldn't have sent her to you if it wasn't for you two to be together." The woman held the envelope with the money the boy gave her, as if it were a divine gift, tears freely running down her face. Shortly after, Merrick arrived at the last room. The sign on the door read "Isolation," and the boy paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. He put on a mask before entering. Harlan approached as close as he dared, trying to understand what was happening there. "Hi, little warrior. Where's that princess book you wanted to read? Want me to read a little bit before you sleep?" Merrick's voice sounded different now, softer, almost like an older brother talking to a younger sibling. Unbeknownst to himself, Harlan had held his breath. Each of Merrick's gestures, adjusting the pillow, checking the room temperature, caressing the child's hair, was laden with love and care. There was something about the boy that made everyone around him seem smaller, less important. He jotted down seemingly trivial details in his notebook. Likes to draw butterflies. Afraid of sleeping in the dark. Each observation was like proof of his dedication. The nurses in the ward passed by him with affectionate smiles. One of them handed him a cup of hot chocolate, which he accepted gratefully before continuing his visits. "Have you checked on Calder today? He asked about you all afternoon," one of them said with a tone of concern. The name intrigued Harlan, for he saw Merrick grasp the small crucifix hanging around his neck as if seeking strength. "I'm going there. My little brother. He's the reason for all this. It was because of him that I learned to fight, but now I fight for everyone." But the moment was interrupted. A nurse came running down the hallway, her face pale with urgency. "Merrick, quick!" "It's Calder." The last sentence was a cruel statement. He had another cardiac arrest. Merrick stopped in the middle of the hallway, his eyes wide. The notebook fell from his hands, the pages scattering across the floor. "No, not again. Not now that we're so close," the boy said, breathless. The boy ran toward a room in the intensive care unit, where the frantic beeps of the monitors filled the air. Merrick's scream echoed with such force that Harlan felt each word like a punch in the chest. "Calder, I'm here, brother, I'm here!" he screamed. The last thing Harlan heard before the doors closed was the shrill sound of the cardiac monitor, followed by Merrick's devastating scream. "God, please don't take him! I'll do anything, anything!" Harlan remained in the hallway, paralyzed, as the doors of the intensive care unit closed before his eyes. The sound of the frantic beeps and nervous voices inside the room came muffled, but it still seemed to tear the silence of the empty hallway. He was breathing fast, almost panting, while his eyes remained fixed on the sign indicating the room number. Time seemed to freeze, but the chaos on the other side of the doors was a constant reminder that someone's life depended on every second. Screams echoed through the hallway, indistinct words but charged with urgency. Merrick's voice, punctuated by sobs, was the only one Harlan could clearly distinguish. "He's crying," he thought, his heart tightening even more. The sound was different from anything he had ever heard. It was not just sadness, but a kind of despair that seemed to be born from a primal fear, a fear of losing something irreplaceable. Harlan tried to push the thoughts away, but his mind insisted on recreating the scene he couldn't see. What's happening? Is he losing his brother now? My God, what is this boy going through? He asked himself, clenching his fists, the powerlessness burning in his veins. With every second, the beeps of the monitors seemed louder, more urgent. At times they ceased completely, leaving only a devastating silence before resuming, as if struggling for the life that was slipping away. Harlan closed his eyes, wishing he could do something, anything. And then, a new scream tore through the silence, coming from Merrick, so laden with pain that Harlan had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. The minutes dragged on like hours in the silent hospital hallway. Harlan remained leaning against the wall, his body tense like a violin string about to snap. The weight of the day's events seemed to multiply in his mind. He had lived through many crises over the years as a businessman, facing betrayals and financial downfalls, but nothing had prepared him for the vulnerability he felt now. His eyes were fixed on Calder's closed room door, as if his mere presence could influence the outcome of what was happening inside. Every second that passed without news seemed like an eternity, and the uncertainty ate away at his patience. The sounds coming from inside the room were muffled, but enough to amplify the tension in the hallway. The constant beeping of the monitors, the sound of voices in urgent tones, and the occasional noise of medical equipment created an anguishing symphony that seemed to reverberate directly in Harlan's chest. He didn't know exactly what was happening inside, but he could feel the weight of the struggle being waged. The uncertainty was torture, and every sound felt like a stab in his nerves. He didn't know Calder, had no direct tie to Merrick, but he felt connected to the fate of both in a way he couldn't explain. Perhaps it was the way Merrick had risked everything to save him earlier that day, or perhaps because for the first time in years he was seeing beyond numbers and business success. He was realizing the fragility of life and the extraordinary strength a child like Merrick was capable of demonstrating, even in the face of adversities that would have broken many adults. "Please, God," he muttered to himself, looking up at the ceiling as if seeking a direct connection with something greater. "Don't take another child from this world. Not after everything I've seen today." His voice was almost a whisper, but carried an intensity he didn't recognize in himself. The plea was not only for Calder, but for Merrick, for everything that boy represented, for all the times Harlan had ignored the pains of the world around him. He knew that regardless of what happened, that night had already changed something inside him. Finally, the door to the room opened. The sound of the wood sliding against the floor caught everyone's attention in the hallway, but mainly Harlan's, who straightened instinctively. "Doctor." Seraphine emerged from the room with a slight smile of relief, though traces of fatigue were evident on her face. Her eyes first met Merrick's, who had jumped up so quickly he almost lost his balance. The boy was visibly trembling, his hands gripping the crucifix so tightly that his knuckles were white. The doctor approached him, gently resting her hand on his shoulder as her soft voice cut through the tense silence. "We managed to stabilize him, Merrick. Your brother can't wait anymore. Her voice faltered for a moment, the smile gradually disappearing from her lips. "We need to talk about something serious." Merrick swallowed hard, and Harlan could see the tension growing in the boy. His frail shoulders were rigid, as if he were bracing himself for an inevitable blow. "Doctor." Seraphine led Merrick to a set of chairs in the hallway, without noticing Harlan's presence partially hidden behind a column. The businessman felt a mixture of relief at the news that Calder was stable and apprehension about what was to come. He watched Merrick's face, a blend of hope and fear no child should have to express. As the doctor began to flip through a folder of exams, the gravity of the moment became even more evident. "Merrick, your brother needs to start the treatment we discussed immediately. If he has another arrest, it will be difficult to save him. This time it was close. In this children's ward alone, besides Calder, we've discovered 5 more children with other medical conditions who can't afford it. They all need to start treatment urgently. I know it's a difficult situation. As a doctor, I wish I could do more than I do." The phrase fell like a bomb. Merrick's eyes widened and he instinctively brought his hands to his mouth, muffling a gasp of shock. The doctor began to show the medical records one by one, each page revealing a new face, a new story, a new battle for life. Merrick looked at each photo with an almost reverential attention. His tiny fingers gently traced the written names, as if he wanted to memorize each one. "Doctor, how much does the treatment cost for each of them? Please tell me I can help." His voice was hesitant, but determined. Harlan felt a tightness in his chest when he heard the answer, an astronomical value, quite similar to the amount the boy had asked him for. He watched as Merrick reacted to that information with impressive courage. The boy opened his worn backpack, taking out the card and grabbing the suitcase of money, with what was left of what he hadn't distributed yet. I can pay. It was a miracle, but I saved a man's life today. He gave me a reward. I'll use everything he gave me, every cent to pay for my brother's treatment and the others." The tone of his voice was firm, but Harlan could see the tremor in his hands as he began to organize the money. The businessman stood still, as if fearing any movement might break the boy's willpower. With a determination that seemed supernatural for someone so young, Merrick began separating the amounts for each child, filling out forms with a childlike but careful handwriting. He murmured the names of the children as he worked. It was as if each name was a mantra, a silent promise he was making to himself. The silence in the hallway was broken only by the sound of paper being handled and the distant beeping of the heart monitors. Harlan watched with his eyes fixed on Merrick, marveling at the seriousness with which he dealt with that situation. The boy worked with the precision of an experienced accountant, but occasionally his hands would tremble. "I won't leave anyone behind. I can't leave anyone behind." His voice was low, almost a whisper, but carried a conviction that touched Harlan deeply. When the last form was signed, Dr. Seraphine took a deep breath before looking at Merrick. "Dear, the remaining amount will not be enough for Calder's treatment." The doctor's words echoed through the hallway, creating a heavy and uncomfortable silence. Merrick looked at the remaining money in his hands, just a fraction of what was needed. His face, once determined, was now consumed by an expression of pain and helplessness. But I asked the man I saved for a fortune. I promised my brother I would make it. Are you telling me I have to choose between saving my brother or everyone else?" He clutched the money against his chest, as if trying to find a magical solution. Sobs began to escape Merrick, each one carrying the weight of the broken promise. He fell to his knees in the hallway, holding the credit card and the last envelopes of money. I can't let my brother die." Dr. Seraphine tried to console the boy, but he seemed inconsolable. His sobs echoed through the empty hallway, creating a scene Harlan would never forget. It was at this moment that Merrick's eyes met Harlan's. The businessman felt a pang of guilt and recognition as he realized the boy had noticed he was there. Merrick slowly got up, his movements hesitant, as if the weight of his emotions was draining his energy. "Mr. Harlan, I didn't spend beyond what we agreed." His voice was almost inaudible, but carried an overwhelming sincerity. Merrick began walking towards Harlan, holding the card and briefcase with trembling hands. "I donated most of the money you gave me for saving your life. But when I went to pay for my brother," the boy said. The businessman stood still, watching as Merrick, tears streaming down his face, held the money back out. "I couldn't pass the card beyond the amount we agreed on. But now my brother." The hallway seemed to have frozen in time. Every little sound, the beep of cardiac monitors, the distant murmur of conversations between doctors and nurses, even the muffled sound of occasional footsteps, seemed amplified by the silence that hung between Merrick and Harlan. Dr. Seraphine remained motionless, her eyes divided between the boy, his small body shaking with emotion, and the businessman, whose rigid posture betrayed an internal battle neither of them could see. The fluorescent lights above cast subtly swaying shadows on the hospital's white walls, as if even the environment tried to reflect the tension of that moment. Merrick's tears glistened in the light, slowly trickling down his cheeks already marked by exhaustion and the day's pain. He held out his hands again, holding the card and briefcase, his small fingers trembling so much they almost dropped what he was holding. His shaky, almost choked voice filled the space between them. "Please take it back. Maybe you can use it to help someone else." Those words were like a muffled cry in Harlan's heart. He could feel the weight of every syllable, the raw sincerity and sacrifice behind that offer. Merrick wasn't just returning the money. He was surrendering his last hope, his only chance to save his brother, to keep his honesty. After all, he had agreed on the amount the millionaire would give him. And yet, the boy put kindness first. It was something Harlan didn't know if he would be capable of doing in his entire life. The sight of Merrick, small, vulnerable, but unshakably determined, made Harlan take a step forward, his own eyes glistening with the emotion he tried to hide. The weight of the impending decision seemed to press him against the ground, each heartbeat echoing like a drum. Harlan opened his mouth, feeling the words rise to his lips, but hesitated for a moment, as if he knew his answer would change everything forever. Harlan's steps echoed softly in the silent hallway as he approached Merrick, each movement laden with an invisible weight that seemed to increase with every second. His eyes, marked by years of difficult decisions and sacrifices, were fixed on the boy who still held the card and envelopes as if they were all he had in the world. When Harlan finally stopped in front of him, the businessman took a deep breath, letting the air out slowly as if gathering the courage needed for what he was about to do. He knelt down, leveling himself with Merrick, and placed his large, calloused hands on the boy's frail shoulders. Merrick froze in place. That unexpected gesture was charged with something he couldn't decipher, perhaps a mixture of strength and vulnerability. But what really made him hold his breath was Harlan's gaze. There was something in the businessman's eyes, an old pain, a deep recognition that the boy didn't understand, but felt instinctively. "Before you return anything to me," Harlan began, his voice hoarse and low, as if each word carried years of grief and regret, "tell me one thing, son. What disease does your brother have?" the millionaire asked. Merrick hesitated for a moment, his eyes still glistening with unshed tears. He didn't expect that question. Swallowing hard, he answered in a trembling voice, but trying to sound firm. "Restrictive cardiomyopathy," he said, pronouncing each word slowly, as if he had memorized the phrase from so many times the doctors had repeated it. His small fingers gripped the envelopes in his hands as he continued, his voice faltering slightly. "It's a rare disease that makes the heart." But he didn't finish. Harlan's expression stopped him. The color seemed to have drained from the businessman's face, and Merrick was alarmed. "Sir, are you okay?" Harlan staggered back, his hand instinctively seeking support on the corridor wall. For a moment, it seemed like he had been transported to another place, to another time. His eyes were wide and his breathing labored. Slowly, he brought his hand to the inside pocket of his coat, his trembling fingers searching for something with an almost desperate urgency. Merrick watched, confused, but remained silent. From within the worn leather wallet, Harlan pulled out an old photograph yellowed by time and held it before his eyes. It was a simple image yet laden with emotion, a smiling boy connected to hospital machines with bright eyes that seemed to contain the entire world. "My God, after 20 years, it can't be a coincidence," he murmured, more to himself than to the others. The hand holding the photograph was visibly shaking, while the other gripped the wall as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. Harlan seemed distant, as if the present had vanished and he was reliving something he had tried to bury for 2 decades. Merrick looked at the photo, noticing the wires and monitors that resembled those keeping his brother alive. "Mr. Harlan?" the boy called, his voice hesitant, trying to bring him back to reality. It was Dr. Seraphine who interrupted that moment of silent introspection. She took a step forward, her expression, which until then had been one of simple observation, transforming into a mixture of surprise and understanding. "Mr. Harlan," she said carefully, her voice laden with respect. "Now I remember. The case of little Arthur. It was one of the first I followed when I was still a resident." The doctor's words seemed to break the bubble of memories in which Harlan was trapped. He turned his gaze to Merrick, but seemed to look through him, as if the images of the past were still overlapping the present. His hands gripped the photo so tightly that the corners began to crumple. Merrick didn't know what to say or how to react. He simply watched as the man before him, who had seemed so imposing and unshakable, let slip the pain he had held for so long. With a sudden movement, Harlan tucked the photograph back into his pocket and approached Merrick. This time his trembling hands took the boy's small hands, preventing him from returning the card and envelopes. There were tears in Harlan's eyes now, tears he made no effort to contain. "My son, my Arthur, was the same age as your brother when we discovered the disease," he began, his voice broken by emotions he could barely control. "Back then there wasn't the treatment that exists today. We tried everything, moved mountains, but—" Harlan paused, closing his eyes as if reliving every painful moment. When he opened them again, tears were streaming freely down his face. "He fought as hard as your brother is fighting now, but back then we had no hope. There was no treatment, no cure. All we had left was to pray and wait." His voice failed, and he took a deep breath, trying to compose himself. Merrick watched him in silence, paralyzed. He wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. It was as if, for the first time, he was seeing the true Harlan, a man stripped of all the masks the business world demanded. Harlan's tears were a reflection of Merrick's own emotions, and the boy felt an inexplicable connection with the stranger who had entered his life so suddenly. "Now I understand why God made me slip on that terrace," Harlan murmured, his voice low but laden with a new understanding. "Why he put you in my path." He slowly stood up, taking another card from his wallet. This time his fingers didn't tremble anymore. There was absolute certainty in his gestures. He handed the card to Dr. Seraphine, who took it with a cautious expression. "Doctor, I want you to use this card for Calder's treatment." Merrick blinked, trying to absorb those words. His small fingers were still holding the card and briefcase that Harlan had prevented him from returning. "This money is yours, Merrick," Harlan continued, his voice firm but gentle. "Use it to help the other families as you were doing. I'll take care of your brother's treatment." Dr. Seraphine hurried to fetch the necessary forms, leaving Harlan and Merrick alone again. The businessman knelt before the boy again, firmly holding his shoulders. "You didn't just save my life on that terrace, son. You saved my soul." Harlan's words, so laden with emotion, made Merrick's eyes fill with tears again. But this time the tears were not of despair. They were of gratitude, of renewed hope, of relief. His fingers gripped the crucifix around his neck, while his lips moved in silent prayer. Harlan watched the boy, finally understanding that this encounter was not just a coincidence. It was destiny. The sound of the monitors in Calder's room seemed softer now, as if even the machines understood the importance of that moment. Harlan knew that this day marked the beginning of something much greater. As he watched Merrick, a new conviction took hold of his heart. He would transform the pain he had carried for so long into a force to help those who were still fighting. Dr. Seraphine began the treatment the following morning, with an energy that conveyed a sense of urgency and responsibility for the moment. Calder's room was filled with monitors displaying vital signs, infusion pumps and other equipment, brought in specially for the procedure. Each piece of technology seemed like a stake in a battle no one was willing to lose. Merrick watched it all with wide eyes. Every move the doctor made a mixture of hope and dread. He gripped Calder's hand, feeling the weak but steady warmth as he whispered promises he could barely sustain. "It's going to be okay, little brother. I promise I won't let go of your hand for a second," the boy said. Harlan remained in the corner of the room, a man who, despite his power and influence, seemed reduced to impotence in the face of life's fragility. He held a rosary that Merrick had lent him, his fingers nervously moving the beads as he murmured prayers he hadn't said in a long time. The businessman tried to maintain a calm expression, but his eyes betrayed a deep fear, a memory of a past he had sworn to bury. He looked at Calder, seeing not only the boy in front of him, but the reflection of his own lost son, as if the two were connected by something greater than himself. The first few minutes after the medication began brought temporary relief. Calder kept his eyes fixed on his brother, a small smile forming on his pale lips, as if to reassure everyone that he was okay. But the relief didn't last long. Suddenly the heart monitor began to beep frantically, the shrill sound cutting through the air like an emergency alarm. Calder's small body began to tremble, violent spasms that made Merrick grip his hand even tighter, as if he could stop them. "Doctor, what's happening to him? Calder! Calder, look at me!" Dr. Seraphine sprang into action immediately, her hands moving with impressive precision between medications and equipment adjustments. The expression on her face had changed from concentration to fierce determination, every second being crucial. Calder's face began to lose what little color it had, his lips taking on a bluish hue that made Merrick let out a muffled cry. He felt like he was trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. No, please, no. He can't die, not now," Merrick pleaded. Harlan took a step forward, placing a firm hand on Merrick's shoulder. "Easy, boy. She knows what she's doing." "Trust her," the millionaire said. But even Harlan couldn't hide the tremor in his voice. The scene before him was terribly familiar, and every second dragged him back to that night 20 years ago when he watched helplessly as his son fought for his life. His body is rejecting the medication. "Doctor," Seraphine shouted to her team, not taking her eyes off the monitor. "We need to stabilize him before his heart stops again." Nurses rushed in and out of the room like a hurried choreography, bringing new medications, equipment, and bags of blood. The sound of alarms and beeps created a chaotic symphony that heightened the sense of despair. Merrick, unable to do anything but hold his brother's hand, felt tears stream uncontrollably down his face. His voice, once so full of determination, was now just a desperate whisper. "Please, Calder, stay with me. Please, don't leave me alone," he begged. With each spasm from his brother, it felt like his own heart was being crushed. When Calder began coughing violently, Merrick screamed, trying to move forward, but was held back by Harlan. "It's going to be all right, Merrick," Harlan said firmly, holding him by the shoulders. "You need to be strong now. He needs you." The words were more for himself than for the boy, an attempt to maintain composure in the face of a scene that was tearing him apart inside. The boy's oxygen levels continued to drop, the red numbers on the monitor blinking like a countdown. "Doctor." Seraphine, her face covered in sweat, ordered the crash cart to be prepared. "Blood pressure crashing," the nurse shouted. "We need the defibrillator ready." Calder's face was contorted in pain, and Merrick couldn't take his eyes off his brother, as if he feared any glance away would be goodbye. The room felt like a battlefield. Seraphine injected medications with millimetric precision, her hands never hesitating. Harlan began to pray out loud, the words mingling with Merrick's stifled sobs. "Our Father, who art in heaven," he prayed, his voice choked and trembling. But he continued, every word an effort to keep hope alive. Merrick heard him, but he couldn't respond. He only gripped the crucifix around his neck so tightly that his knuckles were white. Then something changed. At first it was just a slight adjustment on the heart monitor, a small sign that almost went unnoticed. Dr. Seraphine leaned in closer, her eyes widening as she checked the numbers. It's working," she said, her voice laden with hopeful surprise. "His body is accepting the new dosage." The numbers began to stabilize slowly. The oxygen saturation gradually climbed, the heart rate finding a steadier pattern. Color started to return to Calder's cheeks, and his breathing, once erratic, became calmer. Merrick, still holding his brother's hand, felt a wave of relief so intense he nearly fell to his knees. "Calder," he murmured, the word coming out like a prayer. Harlan let out a shuddering sigh, tears of relief streaming down his face. He moved closer to the bed, watching Calder as if it were the first time he'd ever seen someone pulled back from the brink. "How you're stronger than you think, little warrior," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You have the best guardian angel anyone could ask for." Calder slowly opened his eyes, blinking as he tried to focus on Merrick's anxious face. A small smile lit up his own, weak but full of meaning. "Merrick," he whispered, his voice hoarse but steady. "I knew you would make it." Merrick's tears were now of joy. He kissed Calder's forehead, feeling the warmth he had feared losing forever. "I love you, little one," he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "Now rest. Tomorrow will be an even better day." The hospital room, which moments before had seemed the scene of an impending tragedy, now emanated an almost celestial peace. The golden sunlight streaming through the windows cast soft shadows on the white walls, as if the very environment was breathing relief. Every little sound, the rhythmic beeping of the monitors, Dr. Seraphine's pen scratching paper as she made her final notes, Calder's soft sigh as he slept, contributed to a tranquil symphony, an absolute contrast to the chaos and anguish of minutes before. Harlan remained standing, his eyes fixed on the two brothers. There was something so profoundly touching about that scene that he felt a wave of emotions sweep through him. Merrick, his head tilted to the side, still held Calder's hand as if he didn't want to risk letting go for even a second. His expression, though weary, radiated a peace that Harlan couldn't describe. That boy, so small and frail at first glance, was in truth a giant of courage and love. Harlan swallowed hard, feeling his eyes well up. He knew he was witnessing something extraordinary, the strength of a bond that had indeed conquered death itself. Dr. Seraphine, for her part, closed the chart and raised her eyes to Harlan, allowing herself a rare smile. "He's a fighter," she said softly, as if she didn't want to break the almost sacred silence of the moment. "With the progress we've seen today, I'd say we have reason to be very optimistic. This boy has an uncommon strength." Harlan nodded, but didn't respond immediately. He was too immersed in his own thoughts, absorbing the enormity of what had happened here. Calder, the little warrior who had so often teetered on the brink, now relaxed peacefully. His face, once marked by pain and effort, had a serenity that Harlan hadn't seen in a child for many years. The softness of that moment transported him back in time, to memories of Arthur, his own son who never had the chance to overcome the battle against the same disease. But this time, the outcome was different. This time, there was hope. Merrick raised his eyes, meeting Harlan's gaze. For a moment, neither of them said anything. It wasn't necessary. There was something powerful and silent in the connection they now shared. A mutual understanding, a mutual gratitude. Harlan took a small step forward, bending down to Merrick's level. He placed a firm but gentle hand on the boy's shoulder, as if to impart strength. "You did more than save him, Merrick. You showed us what truly matters." Merrick blinked rapidly, holding back the tears that threatened to escape again. He looked at his brother, then at Harlan, and his shy smile appeared for the first time in hours. "I only did what any brother would do," he replied, his voice low but full of emotion. Harlan shook his head, a soft smile lighting up his tired face. "No, my boy. You did much more. You gave us a new chance, and that's something I'll never forget." As the sun continued to illuminate the room, Harlan turned his attention to Calder. He was breathing softly, his little chest rising and falling with the peaceful rhythm of deep sleep. Harlan felt a new determination growing inside him. He knew this was just the beginning. "And so our new story begins," he thought, his eyes shining with renewed emotion. A story of miracles, faith, and unconditional love. Weeks later, the day of discharge from the hospital finally arrived. Calder was sitting on the edge of the bed, his legs swinging animatedly as Merrick carefully folded the few clothes they had. The room, which for so many weeks had witnessed tears and prayers, was now illuminated by the youngest boy's radiant smile. Dr. Seraphine had just finished her last check, confirming what the latest tests had already indicated. The cure was complete. "Look, Merrick, I can breathe deeply without pain," Calder exclaimed, filling his lungs with air as if it were the best feeling in the world. "I can't wait to go back to our home." Merrick carefully put away their few belongings in the battered backpack, making a tremendous effort to hold back his tears. Not of sadness at the departure, but of gratitude for everything Harlan had done for them. He was silent, his heart heavy with the thought of saying goodbye to the millionaire who had meant so much to them. The new coat he had brought for Calder the night before was the last reminder he could leave. "Is everything ready, little brother? Didn't we forget anything?" Merrick asked, his voice trembling slightly. "Our home must be needing a good cleaning after being closed for so long," he said with a smile. Dr. Seraphine was finalizing the last discharge papers, trying to prolong that moment as much as possible. Calder was already standing, walking from one side of the room to the other, excited at the idea of finally going home with his brother. His steps were firm, so different from the fragility of weeks before. His eyes shone with an energy that made it seem as if he had never been ill. "Can I take the teddy bear Uncle Harlan gave me?" he innocently asked, hugging the stuffed animal. "I promise I'll take very good care of it." Harlan approached Calder, adjusting the new coat on the boy's small shoulders. His hands trembled slightly as he arranged the collar, struggling against the urge to simply hug them and not let them leave. The businessman had spent all those weeks accompanying Calder's recovery, creating bonds that now seemed impossible to break. "Of course you can, champ. The bear is yours. I'm so happy you liked it so much." The hospital corridors looked different that morning. The same white tiles, the same fluorescent lights, but there was an atmosphere of farewell in the air that made every step seem heavier. Merrick held Calder's hand tightly as he always did, guiding his brother towards the exit. Employees stopped to say goodbye, some with tears in their eyes. "Shall we stop by the chapel before we go?" Calder whispered. "I want to thank God and Mommy up in heaven." In the chapel, the three, Merrick, Calder and Harlan, remained silent for a few minutes. The same place where it all began, where a soda can rolled to Merrick's feet like a divine sign. The businessman watched the brothers kneeling, their heads bowed in silent prayer. "Thank you, God," Calder murmured, his childish voice echoing in the sacred space, "for sending the little can and Uncle Harlan to us." The morning sun welcomed them at the hospital exit, warming their faces and making the contained tears sparkle. Merrick adjusted the backpack on his back, holding his brother's hand firmly. It was time for the hardest farewell. Harlan was standing next to his Mercedes, his restless hands in his coat pockets. "Mr. Harlan," Merrick began, his voice failing, "we will never be able to thank you enough for what you did." Calder ran to hug the businessman's legs, his tears now flowing freely. Harlan knelt down, hugging the boy tightly, feeling his heart ache. The little one sobbed softly, clinging to the expensive coat as if he never wanted to let go. "I'm going to miss you so much. Promise you'll visit us?" Merrick approached to say goodbye too, his legs trembling with each step. The past few weeks played like a movie in his mind. The terrace, the card, the cans, the miracle of the cure. Now it was time to return to reality, to his simple life caring for his brother. "Come on, little bro," he said softly, holding out his hand to his brother. "We have a long way to go home." It was then that Harlan spoke, his choked voice cutting through the morning air. "Where are you going?" The brothers stopped, confused. The businessman took a step forward, his teary eyes fixed on the boys. You don't think that after all this you're just going away, do you?" Merrick blinked several times, trying to understand. Calder looked from one to the other, still clinging to the teddy bear. Harlan knelt down again, getting to the boy's height, his trembling hands holding both their small hands. My house has so many empty rooms, so much space to be filled with laughter and love." Time seemed to freeze at that moment. Merrick felt his heart stop for a second, while Calder's eyes widened in understanding. Harlan continued, his voice now barely containing emotion. Would you like to come live with me? To be a family?" The tears that Merrick had held back all morning finally overflowed. Calder was the first to react, throwing himself into Harlan's arms with a shout of joy. The businessman hugged the younger boy, extending his other arm to Merrick. "I promise," he said, his voice choked up. "I promise to take care of you as if you were my own sons." Merrick finally allowed himself to fall into Harlan's arms, sobbing like the child he was, but who for so long could not be, for he had assumed the responsibility of an adult. The three remained like this, embraced under the morning sun, their tears mingling in a silent promise to never separate again. "Shall we go home?" Harlan asked softly. "To our home." The black Mercedes waited patiently, its doors open like welcoming arms. Harlan picked Calder up, keeping an arm around Merrick's shoulders. The sun was shining brighter now, as if blessing this new beginning. And for the first time since their mother had left, the brothers felt they really had a place to call home. "Home," they answered in unison, finally complete. The Mercedes glided silently through the city streets, leaving behind the hospital that had been the scene of so much suffering and miracles. In the back seat, Calder kept his face pressed against the window, his wide eyes watching the scenery gradually change. The downtown buildings gave way to increasingly larger houses, with well-tended gardens and high walls. Merrick held his brother's hand, his heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. "Look, Merrick, the houses look like castles," Calder exclaimed, his breath fogging up the car window. The car turned onto a tree-lined street and stopped in front of an imposing wrought-iron gate. Harlan smiled through the rearview mirror, watching the boys' awestruck expressions. The gate opened automatically, revealing a tree-lined avenue leading to a breathtaking colonial-style mansion. The white-walled building with its blue windows looked like something straight out of a fairy tale. "Welcome to your new home, my boys," Harlan said, his voice choked with emotion. "This is where our new story begins." Calder practically jumped out of the car as soon as Harlan parked, his eyes shining as he spun around trying to see everything at once. The garden was a true park, with a marble fountain in the center and colorful flower beds in every direction. Merrick got out more slowly, still holding the battered backpack, his teary eyes fixed on the vastness of the place. This is bigger than any house I've ever seen in my life," he whispered, his voice trembling. "How can this be real?" Harlan led the boys down the marble staircase that led to the main door. Each step echoed in the reverent silence that enveloped them. The solid wooden double doors opened onto an entrance hall that made Calder gasp in amazement. A crystal chandelier hung from the high ceiling, casting rainbows on the walls when the sunlight passed through it. "The stairs," Calder shouted, pointing to the curved staircase that rose to the second floor. "It looks like the stairs from Beauty and the Beast." Merrick followed Harlan in silence, absorbing every detail with a mixture of fascination and disbelief. The walls were decorated with paintings in gilded frames, and Persian rugs covered the polished wooden floors. But it was one specific detail that made his heart stop. On the main wall, an empty space between two paintings seemed to be waiting for something. "Here," said Harlan, noticing his gaze, "is where we'll hang our first family photo. Come, I want to show you something special." Harlan led them down a wide hallway to a white door with blue trim. When he opened it, it revealed a huge room decorated with superhero themes. From the curtains to the sheets, every detail had been carefully thought out. On the wall, a carved wooden plaque read, "Calder." The little boy froze for a moment before running to the king-size bed and throwing himself on it. Merrick, come see, there's even a giant Spider-Man on the wall," he shouted, jumping with joy. "And look at all the toys." Before Merrick could process that first surprise, Harlan led him to the room next door. This door had green trim, and when he opened it, the older boy felt his legs weaken. The room was a dream come true. A fine wooden desk occupied one corner, shelves full of books covered an entire wall, and the bed looked like it was made of clouds. But it was one specific detail that finally made the tears fall. On the desk, a new notebook identical to his old hospital companion, but this one was made of genuine leather, with his name engraved in gold. "So you can continue your mission to help others," Harlan explained softly. Calder had already discovered the closet in his room, his exclamations of surprise echoing down the hallway. The drawers were filled with new clothes, all in his exact size. Merrick opened his own closet and found the same abundance: t-shirts, pants, jackets, all of the highest quality. "But how did you know our sizes?" he asked, touching the soft fabric of a blue hoodie. "Dr. Seraphine helped me with that," Harlan replied with a wink. The next discovery was even more surprising. Harlan led them to a room at the end of the hallway, where a gleaming play table shared space with a huge TV and multiple video game consoles. Calder immediately ran to the controllers, his eyes shining with excitement. "Can I play now?" "Please, please," he begged, already turning on the console. Merrick watched the scene, his heart overflowing to see his brother so happy and full of life. The tour continued through the mansion. The dining room was impressive, with a table long enough for 12 people. In the center, a surprise awaited them. A special snack had been prepared with all kinds of treats that children could wish for. Calder ran to the table, his eyes shining at the sight of the cakes, sandwiches, and colorful juices. Merrick hesitated for a moment until Harlan gently pushed a chair towards him. "You can eat as much as you want," the businessman smiled. "From now on, you'll never have to go hungry or worry about the next meal again." The rest of that day was filled with discoveries and joys that seemed endless. Between running through the garden and diving into the pool, Calder couldn't stop laughing, his face flushed from all the play. Merrick, little by little, let his seriousness aside and allowed himself to be just a 12-year-old boy, especially when Harlan started a pillow fight that ended with the three of them falling on the living room carpet, laughing until they were breathless. The hours flew by, and when night fell, the brothers fell asleep on the TV room couch, Calder hugging his new teddy bear and Merrick with his head resting on Harlan's shoulder. The businessman watched his new son sleeping, his eyes brimming with emotion, as he silently thanked the miracle that had transformed his life. That mansion, which for so long had been just an empty house, had finally become a home. "Sleep well, my sons," Harlan whispered, covering the boys with a soft blanket. "Tomorrow will be just the first of many happy days." 6 months had passed since that morning in the hospital. The once quiet Winslow mansion now lived filled with laughter and lively conversations. Calder, fully recovered, had transformed into an energetic boy who loved swimming in the pool and playing basketball with his brother in the backyard. His rosy cheeks and the sparkle in his eyes left no trace of the illness that had almost taken him away. Merrick still had his big heart, but now he had a father by his side who shared the same desire to help. Together, they created the Guardian Angels Project, a program that identified children with rare diseases and provided all necessary treatment. The old hospital notebook turned into a modern system that had already saved dozens of lives. Dr. Seraphine became the project's medical director, coordinating a team specializing in rare heart conditions. The old hospital room where Calder had fought for his life was now part of an entire wing dedicated to treating underprivileged children with heart problems. On the walls, photos of little warriors who had won their battles inspired hope in those who arrived. Harlan discovered that his true vocation was not just making a fortune, but using his resources to transform lives. Every morning before going to the office, he would have breakfast with his children and ask, "How many smiles are we going to give back today?" It was his way of honoring Arthur's memory and celebrating the miracle that had brought Merrick and Calder into his life. Sunday nights became sacred for the family. Gathered in the TV room, they would watch movies while eating popcorn, Calder always choosing superhero stories. "But we don't need superheroes," he would say, nestled between his father and brother. "We're already a real family of heroes." The crucifix that Merrick had received from his mother gained a special place in Harlan's office, alongside Arthur's photo and a new photograph. the three of them smiling in front of the mansion on the day the adoption was made official. It was a constant reminder that the greatest miracles happen when love finds its way through pain. And so in that mansion that had once been only empty walls, a new story continued to be written. A story that began with a can rolling in a chapel, went through an almost disaster on a terrace, and culminated in the greatest gift that love can give: a family. Because sometimes angels come disguised as brave children, ready to teach us that the true miracle is never giving up on believing. Harlan learned that life has mysterious ways of healing our deepest wounds, and that sometimes we need to lose everything to find something even more precious. Merrick discovered that he didn't need to carry the world alone on his little shoulders, and that it was possible to be a child again without losing his big heart. And Calder, in his innocence, showed everyone that true love can cure any illness, turn any sadness into joy, and build bridges over the deepest chasms. Together, they proved that family is not only those born of the same blood, but mainly those chosen by the heart, built with love, and strengthened by difficulties. If you enjoyed this story, we invite you to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Your support motivates us to keep bringing exciting stories almost every day. Don't miss the next surprising narrative that is about to appear on your screen. We are immensely grateful to have you here with us. Now you can click on the links appearing on the screen right now. We have a special selection just for you, filled with valuable stories and guaranteed entertainment. See you there.